kind of flow is I have 10 predictions, maybe expectations, maybe ambitions, maybe hopes, that I see that will be a consequence of, or an outcome of, what we're seeing right now with respect to unprecedented innovation and opportunity with respect to technology innovation, as well as innovation of thought and psychology. And I'll talk about why that is. So if you're going to try and keep along with me, you can hold me to account if I lose order. I'm going to look at my notes every once in a while, but if I lose my place, call me out. That way I'll know you're paying attention and it'll make it more fun. So the first thing I want to talk about, it might not seem particularly obvious because it's not something like blockchain, it's not distributed ledger, I'm not going to open with AI or artificial intelligence. I think one of the largest or most significant consequences of innovation and technology as we're seeing them today is transparency. And what I mean by that is I think innovations in technology, both on the consumer side as well as what's happening at the production level, is enabling and is progressing a level of transparency that companies, consumers, citizens, and individuals have never grappled with before. They've never had the opportunity to embrace or to promote, and they haven't had the sort of parameters and the guidelines in terms of how to operate within that transparency. So for example, social media. Not necessarily the forefront of innovation today, but think about what social media has done. I'm not even going to talk about things as consequential as the Arab Spring. I'm simply going to talk about the fact that consumers can now call out companies or brands on social media and Twitter and say, why did I have to wait so long in your customer service phone line? Why did you not tell me about my flight delay? Why was I not able to get a certain product off of a grocery store shelf? And this level of transparency that's being forced on companies to talk about when there have been errors or mistakes in supply chain, governance issues, failings on executive leadership, whatever the topic may be, however big or small, talking about throwing milkshakes on politicians, Burger King saying that they're going to stop serving milkshakes, McDonald's saying they're going to serve more, whatever it may be, this level of transparency and access to companies and brands is unprecedented, and actually nobody knows the rules operating in that context. Wendy's as a hamburger chain brand has done pretty well, McDonald's has fared better than Burger King, but everyone is figuring this out at the same time. And I think this massive sort of culmination of innovation in social media, but also psychology and how people feel the compulsion to embrace it is really, really affecting corporate governance and product delivery as well. So I will come back to that. But I really want you to remember that I think the very first important philosophical change happening because of innovation is transparency enabled by social media, and therefore the changing demands for transparency. Related to that, this will all sort of weave a total trend. Number two is that companies or CEOs are going to need to take a stand on social issues and policy matters. So I have loads and loads of examples of this, which could take up the full half hour that I have, and I won't go into them, but I'll just talk about a few. So this is affected by transparency, which is my first point, which is a standalone second point. I think no longer can companies sort of comment and say, which they could, by the way, in the 2015 referendum here in the UK, they can't say that is a political issue that we don't comment on. I think now in 2019, and certainly moving forward, that is no longer acceptable. So whether you're Patagonia and you're selling outerwear for adventure sports, your Nike shoes, or your Puma, Adidas, your McDonald's, your Burger King, you can no longer stay quiet on social issues. And I will just talk about how I really specifically clarified it's companies or CEOs. It doesn't have to be the chief exec, so not everyone has to be an Elon Musk or Mark Benioff from Salesforce. And as a counterexample, I will talk about Nike a bit. How many people in the room know what the name of the chief executive of Nike is? Okay, I see no raise of hands. And the good news is that's very good, because if someone said it, I wouldn't know it. And I wouldn't know if you were right, so you could have taken a guess. Everyone, I think, knows that the founder was Phil Knight. Not everyone, maybe. A lot of people should know it's Phil Knight, and he's written a fantastic book. Nobody, interestingly enough, at least in this room, knows who the current chief executive is. But that's okay, because I would bet a large majority of the people in the room and all the people who knew that Phil Knight started that company knows Nike's position on whether or not National Football League players in America should take a knee if they want to, right, at a football game. And that's really meaningful to my mind. We don't know who the chief executive is. We know what their position is on that progressive sort of stance. We don't know whether that's just a marketing ploy. It might be. We can be cynical. But we do know they have decidedly taken a view and taken a marketing campaign around that, which impacted their stock in the first 24 hours, but has seen and delivered really great results quarter on quarter after that. By contrast, Puma, which is really the same product, there really isn't that much of a difference. Kanye West would hate to admit it, between one set of trainers and another. Right? There really is not that much technical innovation within a sneaker and within the foam and the layers that you protect somebody's foot. But Nike stands for something which causes some people to burn their shoes and causes a whole lot more people to buy their shoes. And Puma's sitting on the fence and losing market share as a consequence. On the other hand, Elon Musk. So you could have a very charismatic, outgoing chief executive where you know what his position is on rescuing, trapped children in caves in Thailand, to the stock market going private and even cannabis, right? And I would argue that he's not necessarily always saying things that his board is necessarily agreeing with or happy with, certainly not the SEC, but you know what he thinks about something, as mundane or as idiotic as it might be. And therefore, these companies or these CEOs, as examples, Patagonia is another one, McDonald's is another one with their actions today, they are demonstrating to you that they are willing not only to take a stand on social positions, which I argue was not happening as recent as 2015, and they are making sure you know about that. And the reason is enabled by transparency and the ability to communicate with mass consumers, but also the pressure to be able to do that because all of these services and products are becoming greater and greater commoditized over time. No difference between sneakers, no difference between hamburgers, no difference between buying a car from one vendor or another, and people want to relate or have an emotional connection or rejection of a company's brand value or that chief executive. So that was number 2. Number 3, also related, but its own standalone point, is ethics. I talk about them taking a view on a social position or a policy point, but ethics in general, in sort of day-to-day business as usual, is also being demanded on by companies. Again, this was not happening 5 years ago. And I would argue that innovation and a lot of technology enablement is what's fueling this. So McDonald's, I just mentioned 60 seconds ago. I don't know how many people know what happened at McDonald's overnight or this morning. Show of hands. Okay, it's about a third or maybe 40% of the room. The chief executive resigned or was forced to resign because he had a consensual relationship with somebody else at the company. Immediate reactions are, because of the emphasis, it's consensual, 2 adults. He was actually, he's not married, he's been divorced, I Googled that. So a lot of sort of questions about why is that necessarily a fireable offense. And the reason is because after 2016, the company, for good or bad, whatever you might think about that, put in place a code of conduct for its managers and said, no romantic relationships for managers with anyone who's in their direct line of reporting or indirect. Obviously, this means the CEO has a particular problem. But I would argue, not a problem, sorry, a challenge. But I would argue that when your comp is $15 to $20 million a year, that is a higher bar that you should be held accountable for. And by the way, he signed up for it, right? He didn't reject it. He was part of it. He supported it. So for good or bad, when he chose to enter into a consensual relationship with another adult at work, he violated that code of conduct, and that was a fireable offense. Now, just the underlying point, in case anyone's still thinking that is questionable, the real point of this is how consensual can it be for the other party when he's the CEO earning $15 to $20 million a year and when he runs this massive corporation? If another person is genuinely not so interested and a little bit sort of wary about that relationship, can they really say no? We will never know, but that is the reason that code of conduct is in place. He stepped up to it, he owned up to it, he violated it, he's been fired. By the way, I'm not really worried about it. I think he'll find another gig. But ethics are really important. And I would argue that the fact that McDonald's has taken this position, it's made a very public statement about it, it's even waiting to disclose their quarterly results. It's waiting to talk about what the severance package would be. It's sort of saying we took action as quickly as we could. We thought it was the right thing to do. They are displaying, for all the other sort of concerns that we might have about them as a company, that they are holding an ethical line on this point. And again, they are doing that in the interest of appealing to more consumers and to demonstrate what their brand stands for. Point number 4 then, again somewhat related, diversity and inclusion. For a long, long time, I'm here to tell you, a lot of people have talked about D&I as an add-on, as an afterthought. It would be a good thing to do. We should have an extra section in our annual report. We should have a little task force. We should maybe convene a small subgroup of people to talk about how we can do this in the company better. Okay, that's not happening anymore, and that's not enough. It's very necessary, but it's not sufficient. And I would tell you that diversity and inclusion in 2019, if you go through my order of things ready, because I'm on point 4, those first 3 points are all telling you that consumers are going to demand that there's genuine representation in the decision-making bodies of these companies. How will they know? How are they going to check? The answer is in the products and the services that are coming from these companies. If a car seat, if the molding doesn't fit anybody who's less than 5'7" tall and less broad than an average male, someone's going to think, why were there not women on that design team? If a facial recognition system, a hand dryer doesn't recognize complexions that are darker than a certain shade, someone's going to question, rightly so, who is on that design team. There cannot be customer-centric products and services in an age where, again, I'm arguing that it's getting greater and greater commoditization, that are resonating with consumers unless those decision-making groups of those companies reflect the customers they're trying to serve. Full stop. This room, I love this room. It's pretty good gender diversity for an audience of an event sponsored by Barclays. I would argue it's a little bit too monochrome. There are a few exceptions, but it's a little too monochrome. This room does not represent the demographic population of the UK, let alone Western Europe, let alone Northern Hemisphere, let alone a global organization. We cannot, by definition, as a group, we could all work together and have a huge brainstorming session, and I will tell you now, we will not come up with the best solutions for most of the world. And if we have global ambitions as companies to try and differentiate products and services and meet our customer needs, we are going to fail. For a long time, I think you can argue, how does that work? We have all these multi-billion corporations. They've got, white, older men at the decision-making bodies. These companies are doing all right. Yes, they're doing all right because they got away with it for so long because you didn't have, my earlier points, you didn't have forced transparency, you didn't have culpability, you didn't have accountability, you didn't have a way to have direct access to exec teams or their press teams or their response teams, crisis communications teams, like you do today, thanks to innovation in all sorts of channels, communication, and mediums. So point number 5, which is related, I would assert that no PR will be the new PR. Another example, I've already mentioned him once, Elon Musk. I got to tell you, I don't know if he has a PR team, but he sure as hell doesn't refer to them very often, right? So I joke, obviously, but I suspect he has a PR team. I really don't think he listens to them very often. And the reason that stock price continues to go up, yes, they had really good quarterly results this last quarter, which people actually can't figure out how they did that. Real mysterious profit margins appearing out of nowhere. Nonetheless, even before they had those great quarterly results, that stock price continues to climb at Tesla, despite or because of the fact that people think Elon Musk is relatable. I don't think he's relatable to me at all. But people think because he's speaking off the cuff, he sounds honest, he sounds genuine, he sounds sincere, he must be thinking about designing a car that I would really like. And this is working for that company. And I've never even read a single press release from that company. I've never seen a press release from that company. But I can tell you I've probably seen most of his tweets, even if I don't follow him on Twitter, because they are amplified through social media and through media communications. So I would tell you that I don't really think in future, over time, you're going to have necessarily dedicated PR teams. Even if you do, because maybe that's too sort of provocative of what I'm saying, and I don't mean any disrespect to press teams or comms professionals, I would also argue that no longer will you have, which actually a company that I serve on the board of does have, they have an internal comms team, they have a shareholder comms team, they have an external comms team, and they have a social media comms team. To my mind, this is utterly ridiculous and totally redundant. As one chief executive I work with says constantly, I don't have an internal and external comms team because I can't remember 2 sets of statements, right? And it's true. The messaging should be the same. Elon Musk doesn't come out with certain tweets that are like, oh, this is for institutional shareholders, and I'm going to talk about my profit loss statement. And then here's another tweet, by the way, that's just for the people that happen to like to drive quickly. He tweets about what he believes in, what he holds true to his values, what he thinks is important, and that's what drives the value of that brand. So my sort of 5th point was no PR is going to be the new PR. 6th point, all of these are folding into each other. There's going to be no such thing as an innovation strategy or a digital strategy anymore. How many people here work in organizations that have a digital strategy? Okay, how many of those people work on the digital strategy? Okay, that's good, because I worry for you. I would argue that in order for the company to be long-term successful, or even medium-term successful, if it's thinking about a digital strategy today, it's too late. It cannot be a specific, isolated digital strategy. The company's strategy, full stop, has to include digital at its core. There is no business by which, no company, no industry by which digital should be an afterthought or just a separate train of thought or a separate team. That makes no sense at all. Whether it is communications, transparency, ability to contact customers, even if it's not part of your supply chain, your delivery, your distribution, I would argue it should probably be part of all of those. There is no business that will be operating in 2025, for example, that does not have digital as part of its core strategy. And so if you're working on your company's digital strategy, make sure that starts to get absorbed at the company executive level, otherwise you will be quickly out of a job. Seventh point, similar to the digital strategy point and also what I said earlier about D&I or diversity and inclusion. No longer will sustainability or ESG goals be separate, be an afterthought. Too much like diversity and inclusion, it has long been a separate section in an annual report. Let's talk about our sustainability goals. Let's talk about what we do for the environment. Let's talk about what we do for sustainability. It has to be from the core. And for all of his fault and his poor judgment, that CEO of McDonald's did institute a lot of sustainability within the company. It was not a separate section in his annual report. He talked about plant-based alternatives for meat. He talked about fresh meat. He talked about different packaging. He really put in tech enablement to make sure the supply chain was quicker. He looked at sustainability for making sure that McDonald's was competitive in a new sort of modern environment. And to that degree, any company, we can look at any sector, where the easy ones will be automotive, energy, housing, construction, real obvious ones, obviously, where they have to start thinking about ESG goals and sustainability from their core, just like digital. It's no longer an afterthought, and it's because, again, consumers are going to have a choice. Do they buy a Volvo or do they buy an Audi car? Which car to them represents, it could be virtue signaling, but which one says to them that they are working harder towards sustainability and making sure that they are making a better contribution to the planet? People are going to start deciding on this basis than they do already today, but by the time, again, 2025, and we see the effects of what's happening with innovation, this will become a very binary point. So, some good news. It's not all bad. I would argue that my ninth point is we're going to see fewer jerks in positions of power. Everyone's laughing. I was hoping they'd be like, yay, hurrah. So if you kind of follow my train of thinking and you have transparency, you have accountability, you have ethics, you have vocalization of one's view on policies, even if they're debatable like Elon Musk or somebody else, inevitably, first of all, there will be a decline of mediocrity in decision-making bodies. I 100% believe this. And if those decision-making bodies are more diverse, it is going to include greater talent, and it's going to force out the mediocre lack of talent. And secondly, you're going to have fewer bad actors, fewer bad behaviors. We could argue, and I don't even know if this McDonald's CEO was acting in a bad way, if that was bad behavior. I just know he violated the company's code of conduct. Done. If he was behaving badly, he probably would have been out even sooner. And we are seeing a reckoning. And yes, there will be some casualties along the way. I actually believe there will be some people who are probably well-intended, had no malintent, weren't actually jerks, and they were probably trying to do what they thought was the right thing. But that's okay, because the pendulum has to shift the other way. We have had mediocrity for too long. We have had people who have been excused for their bad behavior because they delivered strong P&Ls, strong returns. That is no longer, again, sufficient. Very necessary, but not sufficient. Operating now the best value and getting the best value creation or enterprise value for a company is going to be much more than driving its financials. It is going to be resonating with customers. It's going to be employee retention in a world where talent has lots of choice. It's going to be able to attract the best talent, and it's going to be able to resonate with the brand, or have the brand resonate. That all requires genuine leaders. We may not know their names, like the guy at Nike. Maybe it's a woman at Nike. I should probably know. But there are going to be fewer jerks because they will get weeded out as a consequence of transparency and everything else I've talked about. So final point, because I know I'm running out of time and I would like to take some questions if that would be all right. So the very last point, which is probably a wrap-up of all of these. I think you're going to start seeing businesses where it's no longer just a cliche, but you will have profit with purpose. Does the company really want to be making cars? Why does it want to make cars? No longer is it sufficient to say, well, it's a really high-margin business. Because it's not enough to just drive for margins, and it's not enough just to drive for the bottom line. Everything I have said, and everything that is no longer going to be excusable because of transparency and technology, which is making the reaction time and the feedback loop so much shorter and so much quicker, is going to demand that companies are offering a product or a service because they genuinely believe in the purpose of doing that, and they genuinely believe in the value. I would argue and submit to you, for example, Monzo Bank. How many have heard of that? Great. I should pitch to the rest of you afterwards. But as mentioned, I'm on the board of Monzo. I would argue to you a digital bank had no chance of succeeding in the UK, where almost every adult already had a current account, unless it stood for something. it made no sense to say we are just going to offer a different kind of current account or a fancy colored card. Instead, they had to demonstrate that they were going to open up financial inclusion, give access to accounts of people without a fixed address, ability to budget, give people the ability to pay friends, have joint accounts, and do all this really simply within an app. They recognized and believed that there was a reason that they should come up with a service that would let people manage their money in a much better way than presently existed. And I would argue all companies going forward, in order to be successful, if you accept anything I said, they will need to be investing in areas that are not just driving bottom line, and therefore they need to really be in it because they believe in what they're offering has a genuine purpose along with the profit line. So if you've been counting along, I think I've just done 10. Wrapped it up really nicely. I did say I was going to keep it quite philosophical, but I absolutely believe none of this would be happening without technology innovation and without all of the sort of new frontiers that have been talked about today, because they can all specifically apply to future of work, for example, and people having a choice about where they want to spend their time and where they want to have a job, and where customers are going to decide how they get their health care, whether they're not going to get access to financial services, and how services are going to be delivered to consumers. So thank you very much for listening, and hopefully we can have some